Hi, welcome. My name is Mario Caro. I'm the director of the Master in Fine Arts here at the Institute of American Indian Arts. First of all, what I'd like to do is to thank Jason Ordaz, Nicole Law, and Andy Prim, who have been instrumental in getting this feed going. So I really appreciate that. I'd like to open up by acknowledging that the campus is located on the traditional lands of the Tewa and Tiwa peoples who make up the 19 pueblos that are what folks sometimes refer to as New Mexico. So this is the second of a series of lectures that we've programmed in conjunction with our Summer Institute. This is our first one, and we're very pleased that we started off yesterday with Brett Graham. He was kind enough to join us from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and discussed his practice, his recent work, in relationship to the theme of our project here, which is Beyond an Indigenous Avant-Garde. And it was a concept that was negotiated and I think ultimately resisted by him. And so this is part of what we're trying to work through here, some terminology, some ideas, a lot of conceptual discussions going on right now. But today we have the pleasure of hosting Ryan Feddersen, whose work demands much attention, not only to the conceptual, but also to the formal. While our institute has been focusing, as I said, on theories of analysis, we're attentive to issues of production as well. So I'm delighted that Ryan can be here today to contribute to this discussion. Ryan Feddersen specializes in creative interactive murals, site-specific installations, and immersive public artworks that invite audience engagement. She received her B.F.A. from Cornish College of the Arts in 2009. She's an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation from the Okanogan and Arrow Lakes bands, and is also of mixed European descent. Recently, she received a national fellowship from the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation and completed public works, artworks titled Synecdoche at the Burke Museum, an incredible piece that's 2 or 3 stories high, Antecedents at the University of Washington, and NEXUS for the city of Tacoma. She's created large-scale interactive installations and site-specific pieces throughout North America, working with the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, For Culture Foundation, I believe it is, Regional Arts and Cultures Council, Arts Washington, Museum of Arts and History in Santa Cruz, the Seattle Art Museum, the Tacoma Art Museum, for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Wellin Museum at the College of New Jersey, and also Northeastern University. So I'm delighted that Ryan is here with us, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we'll have afterwards with our students. So Ryan, please.
Hi, I think I don't have permissions to start my video, but thank you for the, okay, there it came through. Hi, thank you for the wonderful introduction, Mario. I'm so happy to be here with your class today and excited to share with you guys about my work. And so just gonna jump right in. I'm going to share my screen and then kind of talk a little bit about my practice and projects. I'm focusing today on the idea of problem solving as a form of arts practice. And I mean that in a couple different ways. For me, as a conceptual artist without a specific medium, I like to look at every project as kind of like a new exploration of material, content research, interactivity, and think about like a broad way to address the project that's very specific to it. So the majority of my work is site specific. which has its own completely new sets of problems, and kind of working through those is a lot of how I get to the content in the pieces. And I'm going to try and focus on that, but the work is also very content dense. So kind of going through the projects will kind of have a lot of background as well. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to start by talking about a project called 900 Horses, which was commissioned by Spokane Arts for the Tribal Gathering Place in Spokane, Washington. This piece is a kind of a good example of a project being created through a problem solving, like a series of kind of like confines. This was my first public art commission. It was a temporary project, and kind of the constraints of the project is that it was going to be in this plaza, which is about, I think, 2,500 square feet, and that it needed to be temporary and to change throughout the length of these two events. One was Terrain, which was an art festival in Spokane, and the other is Hoop Fest, which is the largest 3-on-3 basketball tournament in the universe. And so hundreds of thousands of people come to Spokane during this time and are on site for these different events. And so those were kind of just the starting points of this project. And so beginning research on the site and trying and develop, I came across this monument. It is on the banks of the Spokane River, and it says in 1858, Colonel George Wright with 700 soldiers was sent from Walla Walla to suppress an Indian outbreak. After defeating the Indians in 2 battles, he captured 800 Indian horses to prevent the Indians from waging further warfare. He killed the horses on the banks of the river directly north of this monument. Now, this is an important thing to note, and a lot of times on racist monuments, they are not actually created in the history of when the events happened. So this was actually erected in 1946, where the US was seeing a resurgence in white supremacy and Nazi sentiments after the defeat of the Nazis in Germany. And they were seeing kind of people trying to like reestablish their sense of power. And so this arbitrary date is when this monument was raised, which, it refers to Indians as an outbreak. It misrepresents this kind of heinous war crime, and kind of in a language that's celebratory. And then it further goes on that it was raised by the Spokane County Pioneer Society, assisted by the sons and daughters of the pioneers of Washington and loyal citizens, which suggests that if you don't agree with its sentiment, that you are not a loyal citizen. So I wanted to look at this and think about kind of the difference between a monument and a memorial, and the way that we share content through public art and the way that we discuss historic events. So I really wanted to create a new lens through which to view the Indian Wars, and more specifically, this particular war crime. And so as a way to kind of create an entry point for that conversation, I dug into the history with the 900 horses that were slaughtered. I was able to find first-person oral accounts that were in my tribe's archives, that they were generous enough to scan and send to me so that I could read through people's accounts of like what this event was like, why it happened. And it was largely it was many tribes' horses. It was the Coeur d'Alene, the Palouse, and the Spokane. The Palouse is one of the 12 tribes that they call Confederated Tribes. And it was intended to both show how far like the white soldiers would go, that they would just murder all of these animals. It was a sign of that they had no kind of like bounds to what they would do. And it was in order to make the winter very difficult to survive. And so I wanted to talk about this through the horses. And so I created these kind of like reverse stencils that were based on the different breeds that were described in this historical account. And then I created a temporary paint that was made through like pulverized pastel pigments that were non-toxic and could essentially be rained away into the ground without having any kind of like ground contamination. And so I then with the help of my sister and a couple assistants, placed the empty spaces of 900 horses over the course of 14 days on the cement in a 107-degree heat wave. It was a project of like very much endurance. And then we, as this was going on, we introduced the community to this history, which was kind of largely undiscussed. There was this kind of interesting age gap because the bones were left on the banks for 50 years. And so people who were very old could remember the bones or hearing about the bones. And people who were very, very young benefited from a new curriculum which teaches Native American history in elementary schools. And so like 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds kind of knew something of this history, but largely in between, people were learning about this, both the Indian Wars and this event during the course of this, I think it was 9 days. Yes, this one was 9 days. The 9 days of this installation. And so I wanted to think about memorial and to create a personal relationship, one person to one horse. The other purpose for this is that with interactivity in art, I believe that when you're making something and when you're dedicating your creative energy to a subject, that it is a meditation on that subject, and it provides a level of introspection that you cannot get from just hearing somebody else talk about it or looking at something someone else produced. So each person would illustrate one horse as an effigy to memorialize that loss, made it a very kind of personal experience. And for me, a lot of this project is also, it's not about the end result. It's not about these illustrations, which, you know, while I photographed really well, ended up washing about 50% away in about 2 weeks after, in a kind of epic summer thunderstorm. It was about kind of all the conversations, the kind of intergenerational discussions as, you know, parents worked with their children. We had vets participate. And only one person throughout the course of the project heard about what the history was and determined that they were not interested in participating. So it's kind of where we were kind of closing in on the end of the project. This project is called Unveiling the Romantic West. It was produced in 2016, commissioned by the Missoula Art Museum and supported by the Andy Warhol Foundation, which supported the entirety of my, this is maybe my second solo exhibition. And they supported the production of new work. The Missoula Art Museum had seen a project that I'd done that looked at a kind of famous historic painting, and I made a parody of it that was an interactive color by number. And they were interested in having a similar work with these kind of historic murals that they have in their courthouse by Edward Paxton. And so I kind of proposed an alternate intervention, and I wanted to look at the kind of like the accuracy of dialogues. And so for me, like, you know, I've been asked to work with this project, and the subject matter is it's depicting colonization, it's depicting settlement. It goes all the way from Lewis and Clark's first interactions with the Salish Kootenai through the expulsion of the Kootenai from their traditional lands. And so it's kind of these celebratory murals in their county. And while they're somewhat more historically accurate than a lot of these are, it's very much a romantic version that not only tells one perspective, which is the white settlers' perspective, it edits out anything that is inconvenient to that narrative. And so I wanted to re-examine these images through a broader lens. I did a lot of research through recorded oral documentation from the Salish Kootenai. They actually produced a book in which they brought together stories that had been passed down all the way from Lewis and Clark's first interaction. As well, they brought all kinds of like detail and specificity to these events in the place. But But I also looked at Lewis and Clark's journals and found extremely contradictory information in there as well. And so in this piece, I took essentially the initial images and then made black and white replicas. I think we're gonna kind of get a little ahead of ourselves. So this is kind of like an X-ray version into the piece. This piece uses a material called thermochromic ink. And so there is images hidden within the image that you can uncover using your body heat. Now this is a process I've used in a couple different pieces. This would be the first iteration. And so inside the image, I hid all of these kind of pieces of deeper information. And so in the trees, we see depictions that represent all of the rights of the treaties. The treaty itself loses one signature because one of them was forged. The chiefs lose their mouths because there was no translator and they were unable to communicate back with the sergeant. He has a broken piece to represent like his broken piece after this. The trickster coyote is kind of watching from the sidelines. I've also corrected some depictions in the regalia that were not regionally accurate. And added the railroads, as the expansion of the railroads was such a huge part of why there was this drive to remove. And so these things, all of these, I think there's 5 total, ranging from 4 feet by 4 feet to 4 by 8 feet. And they're essentially, so like it's more like the work being created through problem solving. They're upholstered, and so they're all have batting behind them to kind of like hold some of your heat, and then Tyvek, which is a very durable material, so that children can rub on them and get them. I think somebody actually tried to color one of them, so they were able to wash that off too. But anyway, so there's all these kind of like layers and secrets hidden within the piece. The idea being that, you know, our Indigenous perspectives on history have often been obscured, but through our diligence, the use of our bodies and persistence, we can uncover them. And this is an exhaustive material. So these pieces over time, as they get touched, will become more and more transparent in these areas. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about an ongoing project called Coyote Now. So Coyote Now is inspired, it's inspired by coyote stories and the trickster coyote, but it's also very specifically inspired by the foreword that Mourning Dove, who recorded oral stories into written format in the early, I think it was like 1920s. She was actually a Native novelist, and she wrote the first full-length novel by a Native woman, which is a romance. It's pretty fantastic. But she also kind of pulled together these coyote stories. And one of the things that she talked about in her foreword was coyotes' immortality. And that Swetlotch, when she gave the coyote the gift of immortality, it was because as Coyote prepared the world for two-legged people, he was going to get into a lot of trouble. He was often going to lose his life. And so if any scrap of fur bone or whisker survived, Coyote could be brought back to life. And I started thinking about, and that paired with coyote stories being like, there's different types of stories. There are stories that are told exactly the same, and there are stories that are told by the teller in their time. And so I wanted to think about like what Coyote has been doing all of this time and kind of create some projects that speculated on that. I was also thinking about the metaphor of creativity being Coyote's immortality, that if we keep creating with Coyote, that he continues to live on. And so since his remains were his vehicle of immortality, I recreated them in cast crayon and created accompanying pieces. They started out very small. At first they were like kind of Bristol boards that covered about like 5 by 7 feet on a wall. And then the latest additions are these wraparound interactive murals that are, I think this one is 10 feet by 72 feet, if I remember correctly. It was for the Museum of Art and History in Santa Cruz. And the audience is then invited to kind of bring these pieces to life through color using coyotes' bones as the crayons. Thinking about the ways that the trickster is able to show us our mistakes by modeling them and showing us the results, or through his often kind of selfish or inappropriate behavior. I wanted to use this as a way to talk about our cultural behaviors. And so kind of in this piece, what you can see part of a vignette is Coyote is having a sweat lodge where he has bribed his frenemy, the mouse, to continuously bring hot rocks. So mouse brings a hot rock and then gets a piece of cheese. But Coyote gets hot, he decides he's done, he's going to leave, but this system he has set up to have mouse do the work of providing his sweat lodge and not thinking later about this system that he's set in place, mouse continuously brings rocks forever, eventually heating the entire planet, causing global warming, which is also like a direct metaphor for how our own systems of consumption are so much larger than we imagine them to be when we walk away. It's kind of like the myth of convenience, where the things we buy for convenience aren't actually more convenient. We just don't have to see all of the work and all of the extraction and all of the waste that goes with it. We only get to see the part that we use. And so this is one of the themes that's within this work. It goes on to Coyote being addicted to technology because he has the same problems as us. He takes the phone in the bathroom because he has filthy habits. And his sisters are, it's a kind of a fun inside joke. His sisters are 3 turds who live in his stomach, which he could take out for advice. And so when he's on his phone in the bathroom, he's consulting with his sisters. The piece begins on the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, where Fox has discovered Coyote's remains after he's been missing for a while and brings him back to life by jumping over him 5 times. And then kind of the adventures wrap around from there. This is an image of after one night in Santa Cruz. They told me that like up to 4,000 people would be at their opening. It's a fairly small community. And I was like, oh, that's unlikely. And then it was absolutely crazy. They really make an event out of their openings, and it was wonderful to see so many people working like so quickly on the piece. I've also found it really interesting to see how different communities work with the pieces very, very differently. Seeing the reflection of like what people choose to add, whether they add words, whether they have conversations with each other, I always find very interesting. So this is a later scene where Coyote has, due to his addiction to technology, he's falling asleep at the job. He gets fired, and so he looks for additional work where he finds an ad on Reddit where he can make certain social media posts go viral for money. However, he ends up getting busted by the FBI for some collusion, and then he goes on the run. So the piece ends in Bears Ears Park, where his hiding spot is accidentally demolished as they're putting in oil cranes. But that is, so in a full Coyote story begins with his resurrection and ends in his death. And that's how you know that you have all of the different pieces of this one story. And so this is a piece that kind of combines a variety of the stories from different projects and kind of like this elongated epic. This is a project called Kill the Indian, Save the Man. It was made originally it was produced in 2016, and then it was reproduced in 2017 and again in 2019 at the Wellin. It was originally produced for a kind of like an experimental space at the Alice Gallery in Seattle. I do a lot of project-based work or project specific work that is made for specific venue sites or communities or looking at certain histories. But in this case, it was an invitation to just work on anything I wanted at the time. And one thing that was particularly on my mind at this time was how the boarding schools had affected the way that I was raised and the life experience that I had, as well as my father's. And I was thinking a lot about how my father had grown up. His mother was in the boarding schools in Washington, and her siblings were in the ones in St. Mary's, were in a lot of the ones in Canada, and her parents had been at Kamloops. And, you know, it was just this, you know, this obstacle, this thing that affected how everyone, like, you know, my dad was 28 when the ICWA was passed, where Native parents were granted custodial rights over their children. And when these boarding schools finally started, after I think 128 years or something, to get dismantled, because people had the right to not have their children taken away. And so, like, their whole lives in that area, being from 2 generations of people forced into these schools, was kind of like this fear of it. And I think it had these have had tremendous effects on all kinds of families. So I wanted to talk about that, but I also didn't want to I didn't talk about people's suffering. I didn't want to make a piece that was shared community suffering to an audience. So I made the decision to make the work very impersonal for that reason, and to make it about kind of proliferation. And so I created this map, which was a kind of facsimile of my research on locating boarding schools within the US. I started with a list that had about 115 schools, and then I tracked down their locations. I tried to find more, and I ended up in the final project, I think there's about 230, which is by no means a full list. You might not be surprised, but a lot of people don't want to talk about the boarding schools that they had in their state. And so it was kind of difficult to unveil them, especially because there's, they fall into different categories. There are ones that are religious, that were about religious assimilation, which were also, I'm going to tie the boarding schools to slave labor as well. And they started to really take off after abolition, and a lot of them were industrial. And so you could have child labor for your industries. And a lot of them were also military. And then even the religious schools were often using the children as child labor as well, both in producing things for sale like embroidery, but also as domestic servants. And so tracking down exactly, a lot of the schools are kind of discreetly named, but what they all had in common is that they were part of this system. The idea was that if you could kill the Indian, save the man by destroying our culture and our familial ties, was kind of what the government was funding in the programs. These people also all took money for the students that they stole. So this piece kind of tracks down and maps those schools and then redacts them. So every name is then blacked out with this thermochromic ink. And then with your body, you can kind of uncover the name of the school. The opening night, there was a heat wave, and it was a unconditioned space. So you can actually kind of see the names come through. And while, this wasn't exactly the way the piece was intended to be viewed, and wasn't how it was viewed in other times, the fact that at his public presentation that they couldn't be hidden, that they unveiled themselves by an act of nature, was, I thought, kind of profound. But here is a example of the piece kind of functioning as intended. Because of the way the thermochromic works, it sometimes you have to press for a while and hold on. And the kind of like the edges are very kind of ghostly. So you can only achieve seeing certain parts at a time, and oftentimes in the shape of your own body. This is a piece called Post-Human Archive. And it was created as an educational experience for the double exposure exhibition at the Seattle Art Museum. And this piece, the request was to interpret an exhibition about Edward S. Curtis, who was the kind of amateur ethnographer who photographed Native people and kind of coined the term the vanishing race. What's not as often discussed in this project was that it was very ahistorical. He had no intent to make it a historical project. He would use photography techniques of the time to remove alarm clocks or evidence of electricity or vehicles or any type of modernity, because this piece was partially sponsored by J.P. Morgan and also connected to Theodore Roosevelt, and was a part of social Darwinism. This idea of they wanted to portray to the public that Native people were incompatible with a modern and industrial future. And so this piece had a very dark social purpose. It was not just about like photography, creating and enforcing the narrative of a vanishing people. It wasn't just documenting. So the exhibition at the Seattle Art Museum had both photos from this project and from his portfolios, but it also had contemporary work of Native photographers, videographers, and sculptors. I was included not as an artist, but as the designing the educational space. And I decided, after this kind of very serious, stoic show of lots of black and white plates, to create a piece that was a humorous parody. So I imagined that if someone were to tell all of us that humankind, that we were no longer going to exist, that it might be artificial intelligence. So as you enter the post-human archive, a disembodied voice would be motion activated to welcome you. And it would say, welcome to the post-human archive, a historical preservation project brought to you by the Children of the Singularity and the AI Center for Ethnography. Our mission is to record the final examples of biological human life for the sake of posterity. We are so excited to document you, a prime example of a real-life human being in our archives. And then, like Curtis sometimes did, I created fake backdrops that were intended to represent human environments. One is in a kind of abandoned office space. The other is intended to be an outdoor space, but it's a photograph, a kind of compilation of photographs in Tacoma, where I live, where the kind of idyllic white puffy clouds in the sky are actually waste coming from, or like pollution coming from the paper factory, kind of hinting towards some of the origins of, or like how humans might be headed towards their demise. And then participants were invited to photograph and document themselves. And then when they hashtagged the images from a public account, the algorithm, or me, would go and retrieve them and then designate them in categories. So I made an archive that was largely based off of the Library of Congress's then archive for Curtis's work. It has since changed, which is kind of cool because there were some things that were pretty racist about it, like categorizing people by kind of like aesthetic features or like profiles or types, kind of like talking about people as if they're not individuals. But I did reflect some of those categorizations in this. I looked at the historic portfolios and then made contemporary parodies. So the Indian days of long ago become the human days of long ago. The the Indians of stone houses become the humans of glass offices. In the land of headhunters becomes in the land of trend hunters, and so on. And then here's a kind of a sampling of some of the submissions. And then there was a kind of like a list of titles for the pieces that were done in the same type of language that Curtis used, where it kind of reduced people to symbols of other things, or titles that were imposed on them there was no way to argue it. Like, if you didn't like how I categorized you, there was no system to request a change. Everyone who participated relinquished control in how their identity was described in the archive. Some more samplings of just lots of pictures. I learned that like 30% of museum goers wear glasses. That seems like a really high statistic. There's some just interesting things about that piece. Let's see, I'm not going to skip this one. I know I'm running a little bit behind on my slides, but this piece is called Aura, and it was created for the Artist Trust benefit auction. Once again, this was an invitation to make a piece that was for an audience that I kind of wanted to maybe challenge or provoke in a way. Like the piece for the Seattle Art Museum, I really thought they were going to tell me no. I thought they were just going to be like, get out, you're not doing that. But so in this piece, I also wanted to be a little playful with the audience as well. And so this is a depiction of space trash. And so this is an event where people come dressed to their nines in their finest clothing, and this artwork was made as a photo backdrop. So with that kind of as my guide, what I wanted to do was I wanted to think of a way to incorporate a design where people would photograph something that is often unseen and unrecognized, and something that people don't want to look at. And so this contrast of kind of like, it looks very beautiful. It is very, with the stars and the earth. I did a obscene amount of research for a project that was so small. But so like everything in the space trash is based on research. It's all from lists of like what is floating in space. Like we know much more, like, things keep falling and billionaires keep putting more trash up there. There's the size of like the debris that gets put into space when people launch something is absolutely massive. Like there's 90,000 pieces of debris that are between 1 and 10 centimeters. There's millions of pieces of trash that's literally just orbiting the earth. And so in this piece, it's talking about both, like, there's some things that are facts that are on there. There's some things that are pointing to specific companies, including companies that sponsored this event, are also being named as culprits in the space trash issue. There's also some anecdotal things, like an astronaut lost a toothbrush, so it's in there. The only thing that is a lie is Starbug is a sci-fi reference. I just couldn't help myself. And so then throughout the night, the attendees photographed themselves with this piece and then proliferated in it, like hundreds and hundreds of images of this piece across the internet. So a lot of my, I make some works that are object-based, but really my practice is towards projects for community and projects that are not necessarily for people to buy, but are for people to experience. And so a very natural progression I felt was public art. And so that's something that I've been pursuing more and more as a major part of my practice. And so, like, I think all the projects from here out are all going to be public artworks. This piece was titled NEXUS, it's in 2019, and it was commissioned for the Prairie Line Trail by the city of Tacoma and was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of a historic interpretation project. And so they brought together a group of historians who created a document, and then artists took that document and interpreted different projects based on it. And so they kind of divided Tacoma's history into these sections. And as you can imagine, pre-contact was like this big. But then the later the later sections dealt a lot with these kind of themes about economy, trade, the exchange of people, goods, and places. I think was a big part of what they were talking about. And it just made me think about kind of like manifest destiny, and how like I was taught as a child in school that the theories of manifest destiny, that like education, healthcare, economy, trade was all brought by white settlers and it didn't exist. And that's just a lie. And so I wanted the project to kind of dig at that. And so I took some of these ideas from the themes of the overall kind of like the summary of the history. And I wanted to reflect those themes, but all through a kind of a pre-contact lens. Though the piece, like a lot of my work, is very contemporary in its aesthetic. Its references tie to the place of many fires, where I, in conversation with the Puyallup tribe, whose traditional land this piece is located on, was one of the sites where trade would have taken place in this space. Like it's a site along the West Coast that is like the intersection of so much indigenous trade. You know, there's evidence of feathers from South America being used as far as like the subarctic, and of course copper from the what's now Mississippi region was traded like all across the continent. And I wanted to look at some of these things. And so the site is referencing the place where trade would take place. The cement across the bottom is etched with a trade of like a, not quite theoretical, it's based on real maps, but a little bit of a kind of like abstracted depiction of a pre-contact trade route. And then it's set up a little bit like store. So it uses two traveling seats that were used in the Plains and Plateau. And then has a parfleche package that is topped with trade items that would have come across through this area through routes across the Plains Plateau into the Coast Salish region. And so this is also, I see this piece as like a meeting point of my culture and the culture where this piece is, since my heritage, my upbringing is from interior Salish Plateau, and this site is Coast Salish, Puyallup. And so there are goods from both of our regions as well as extended regions kind of placed on this table. And part of the idea is, and this is really close to a children's museum, and I wanted to think about this kind of like plain store as being disruptive to narratives of young children being taught that like all trade is Western and economy is a Western idea. And so this piece has I hope has the opportunity to undermine those teachings before schools get to them. There's a little close up of the mosaic. The piece is in bronze, steel, cedar, glass, and tile. And the glass pieces I cast at IAIA during my residency there. So thank you. This is a piece that you mentioned earlier called Synecdoche. And it was commissioned for the new Burke Museum. This was a public art project where they essentially invited the finalists to make a proposal. And it's a natural history museum, but they also do a lot of kind of ethnography. They have a lot of different types of departments and a lot of different applications for their research in the space. And then it's both a research museum and also like a public space. And so I wanted to think about how motifs exist in all cultures and all of our experiences throughout time, and that these kind of historic pieces that they have are a part of a continuum. And I wanted to then put them into relationship with other types of symbols and motifs that we can recognize. So the piece takes kind of like images and motifs from all of the different areas of study at the Burke Museum. This was a really interesting project because I had a meeting with kind of a representative for each one of these areas of research and got to talk to them about like what they do, what kind of specimens they work with. And then I put the images in conversation with each other. So the idea is to think about synecdoches as like they're a figure of speech where a small component can represent a larger whole. And by pairing those things two together, your brain connects the disparate parts and allows you to understand something in a more profound way. So an example would be calling money bread. By calling it bread, we understand that you need money to eat. Or calling soldiers boots, where you understand that soldiers are individual people by referring to them as boots, and that an army is made of many people. And so I wanted to take small components of these different areas and have them represent the larger field, and then pair them with other images that might create different connections. And so there's all kinds of kind of like anecdotal combinations where we have like fossils becoming oil rigs, and we have symbols of kind of like toxicity, as well as like symbols from parks and fragility, and then all these things kind of like each piece like morphs into another. And then this is done over 3 stories, which is 40 feet wide and 60 feet tall. And then they're kind of punctuated by these fluoroacrylic pieces that were added to both bring interest to the wall, but also I really wanted to do something that worked a little bit with the light and with color. This is a fluoroacrylic absorbs light through the surface and it sends it through the sides. So the edges of these pieces glow in daylight, but they also have colored reflections and colored shadows. So throughout the day, these kind of streaks of color would move across the space. I am very excited that they let me move forward with this piece, as the scope of the project asked for, like the expectation was that it would be a glisse replica of like a watercolor painting. I'm sure they imagined a couple people in like canoes or something like for this wall, and what they got was extremely different. But it was a great project and conversation for me in this space. I think it also goes really well with the architecture. But all right, we're getting close. So I think this is the last piece, and then the last slide is a work in progress, which I'll just kind of leave as like a teaser image. This is my most recently completed public art commission, and it was for the Washington State Arts Commission in partnership with the University of Washington for the University of Washington Public Health Building, which is funded by the, or co-funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so this is they funded the rest of the artwork for the building, which their kind of like New York curator picked. I'm the state pick, so I was the kind of like the local public art. So I chose a space that was the pedestrian entry point. So the population health building, the purpose of this space is to bring together people researching all these different aspects of living that affect human health. And so it's both people who are working in like disease, infant mortality, people who are looking at how our impacts on the land are destructive, like contamination. They're really interested in the difference in life capacity. I know that they mentioned that there's a 15-year difference between people who live about 10 miles apart in Seattle. And that's also true in Tacoma. There's a 10-year, I think it's a 10-year difference between people who live north and south of this certain point. And like, why is it that people live such different lives? And like, how do we get to a point where everyone has access to the same length and quality of life, regardless of their socioeconomic standing or race or gender? And so the idea is you bring all these people together and they work on this idea. And so I wanted to create a piece that was a kind of like a welcome and also a vision setting. I wanted to think about like, what should people be thinking? What do I want people to think about when they're coming to do that type of work? And for me, it was about the fact that humans are just one of the many life forms that share and one of the many peoples that share this earth, and that we cannot think about only our own health and survival, that we are interdependent. And so this piece, it references a couple different sources. So one is diagnostic processes. So they're all essentially like fake x-rays and light boxes. They're, I think, 4 feet by 6 feet approximately. So they're large, well, for a short person, they're larger than human scale. And each one depicts a kind of pillar of life, looking at plateau origin stories, specifically looking at so that before there were people, there were other people. There was Bear, who was the chief of the four-legged people, Eagle, the chief of the people of the sky, Salmon, the chief of the people of the water, and Camus, one of the food chiefs and of the plants, which are the people of the earth. And so before there were humans, each category, each type of life had everything that they needed to live. But when humans came, we were just this naked little baby who couldn't survive on its own. And so each part of life gave a gift that allowed humanity to survive and to thrive. And so in these pieces, I'm reflecting back on these kind of origins of life and this reminder that humans are not first, we are last in the order of life, and that we are completely dependent on all other forms of life, population health, in order for us to thrive and survive as well. And this piece is all done in Illustrator. So each of these are files that I kind of have meticulously put together to recreate the aesthetic of an X-ray. And then they are printed on a film that is then laminated in glass and backlit in LED. And then lastly, just a little sneak peek of a project that I'm working on right now that'll be completed next month. This is a piece for a decommissioned brutalist fountain in Tacoma. And currently I've got about a little more than half of the kind of like interventions in. Thinking about like the dry, kind of like massive brutalist cement structure, I wanted to symbolically bring back the water and also tie this monument to nature and to our greatest natural monument locally, which is, you know, the mountain. And so it's a series of glacial waterfalls. And then there's a kind of sun moon in the corner. There's going to be some nighttime lighting that makes the piece kind of elements pop and recede and look like they're rustling. The waterfalls are reflective. And then what's coming up next after this is there's some post-consumer recycled glass to replicate water in these, what is it? Just thousands of square feet of empty basin now. Landscaping and lighting. So I think that takes me to the end of my time and my projects. Thank you all for your time and attention today. I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit about my practice, and I look forward to meeting the class after.
Great. Thank you so very much. There's a lot of work there. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Yeah, we're going to be shifting over to our discussion, but before we leave, I want to announce the last speaker for our series is going to be on Friday, July 23rd at 10:30 a.m. And this is Nolan Oswald Dennis, who will be joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa. So I hope you can join us for that. Thank you so much.